Happy Halloween! Happy Halloween! Happy Halloween! What's happening?
The performance of a lifetime. It was her very first starring role, and she was alone on stage, about to perform the biggest monologue of the role. She had dreamed of this moment. She should be happy. Why did she have a hollow feeling in the pit of her stomach? Was it just nerves? Or did it have something to do with the way the audience stared at her? Their faces were blank, yet there was an air of expectation and judgment. All those eyes on her, it was enough to make anyone freeze. She couldn't, though. She couldn't freeze up. She had never performed in front of an audience of this size before, and especially not solo. Stage fright was natural, but she couldn't let it win. No, and it wouldn't win. She swallowed her nerves and began to speak her lines, clear and strong, just like she'd rehearsed. Their eyes just stared at her. They seemed so empty. She tried not to notice. When she got in the call that the role was hers, she'd been elated. As third understudy, she never thought that she'd get to ever step foot on stage outside of maybe a few rehearsals. She certainly hadn't expected to perform to a sold-out audience. This was all she'd ever wanted, to be a stage actress, to hear the applause and cheering for her at the end, to be able to wave and bow to adoring people, maybe even a standing ovation. Somehow, she hadn't pictured it quite like this, though. Her head swam, and the lights above her were dreadfully hot. No one had warned her about how hot the lights could get. She pressed on, her voice echoing loudly throughout the theater. She had a sharp pain in her neck, and beads of sweat ran down her forehead. Why were the lights so hot? But like a true professional, she carried on. After all, this could be her big break, the role of a lifetime. She had to ignore her body's untimely betrayals. Her hands trembled slightly, but she hoped that no one noticed. She did her best to steady them. The audience was still and silent. Were they judging her? Could they see how much of a mess she was beneath the facade of the character she played? Her knees felt very weak. Hundreds of emotionless faces, like a sea cold and devoid of feeling. Her voice cracked, and her head felt light. The lights were so very hot. The butterflies in her stomach refused to settle, and she felt as though she might be sick. Not now, she pleaded with herself. Please, not now. For a second, she thought she saw something glisten off stage. Had the crew noticed her turn of health? More importantly, had the director. God, her career would be over before it even began. She collapsed to her knees, both because the scene called for it, and because her legs could no longer hold her weight. She was grateful for the timing. All the people, all those faces, dizzy. She felt so dizzy. The stagehands rushed towards her and circled around. Wait, were they stagehands? Her vision was suddenly blurry. They were dressed all in black, so they must have been. But they were grinning, and their smiles were too large, and their teeth too sharp. She tried to stand and couldn't. The lights. Why were the audience still just watching? This was no longer on script. Couldn't they see that something was wrong? The first sunk its glistening teeth into her flesh, and her anguished screams filled the room. Her voice was still clear and strong. Then the next took its turn. She pleaded and sobbed and wailed for help to an emotionless audience. The next took a turn. Rhythmically, they took turns and they tore into her, bite after bite. Her shrieks were both piercing and haunting, and her flesh made wet, ripping noises as it was torn from her bones. Silence. The audience gave a roaring, standing ovation.